some data involving Pluto and other things. And the moon's a really interesting source. The moon came from the Earth, and so you can learn a lot about Earth's history by studying the moon because it's geologically inactive.
Right.
I just love it.
I have a similar geology background, sort of. I was picking blackberries when I was 7 years old, and I found a fossil of a brachiopod, as I know now, and I was hooked. Yeah. And so when I got to high school, my favorite teacher, I had some really good teachers, but the one that made the biggest impact was Mr. Leggett. I think we all had a Mr. Leggett probably, but he was an earth science teacher, and he was so much fun and inspiring that I went to school where he went to, just because I wanted to follow his footsteps and do geology. And he was an upstanding teacher, but I focused on paleontology and worked at a museum in Florida Museum of Natural History, then ended up here at Lowell Observatory. And somewhere along the way, started learning about the astronaut training and all the stuff that's still going on here. And it's such a thriving community. Flagstaff has, of course, Lowell Observatory. There's the U.S. Naval Observatory, the U.S. Geological Survey, Northern Arizona University, those four major research centers that do all sorts of planetary studies and beyond. But the moon has been a focus of study. The USGS was brought here in the early 60s specifically to go to the moon. And the Naval Observatory and all the others were involved in Apollo in some way. And so the fact that we're going back, people going back, and Flagstaff is still involved, is pretty fun stuff.
Do we have a lunar USGS? Is that true?
A lunar USGS?
I've heard rumor that our USGS is designated a lunar USGS.
I have not heard that term. It was, the original name was the astrogeology branch, because astrogeology was, that was the study of getting to the moon. That's what they were preparing for. So it'll be interesting to see how it develops down the road as we go back. And we'll talk about this more about exploring the moon. But next week, the 14th, is Artemis 1 is scheduled again to launch. And if all goes well, 2024 will be a crewed launch around the moon. And then if all goes well, 2025, we could be walking on the moon again. And, it's so neat that we say every astronaut who's walked on the moon is trained here in Flagstaff. And that'll continue to be the case probably, because those astronauts training are still training here. And, this is the second total lunar eclipse we have this year, but the last one until 2025. And it's exciting to think the next time we have one is also potentially the year that we're going to be walking on the moon again.
That is cool.
It's going to be a pretty cool moon year, I think. And it's also we're going to be opening our new Astronomy Discovery Center in 2024. And so our programming is going to be really great to share that, share the moon stuff. It's going to be, it's like a whole new era, it feels like.
I mean, you can come up here to Flagstaff, to the Grand Canyon, come visit us at Lowell Observatory, and then just go outside and play in the area that is basically an almost perfect playground replica of what the lunar surface is like, with all the cinders out there acting like regolith, and like all the very, very comparable rock types. So you can plan a fun vacation around coming up here and visiting our ADC, and then playing on the moon.
There's so much. There's going to be so much going on, and so we're really looking forward to that. We're also looking forward to tonight, the next 2.5 hours, our coverage, just to give some time. And all these times are in Flagstaff time, Mountain Standard Time, or Arizona time in general. It's a lot easier now that we're off daylight savings. It's not quite as confusing, but so about 50 minutes.
Answer one of the questions. That's around when it'll be fully red, right? Because that's when the only light coming through is going around the Earth.
Yeah. So it'll be total from 3:16 to 4:41. So an hour, almost an hour and a half, which is pretty long. It's the longest one that we're going to have for years. And then it goes out of totality at 4:41. So that's a pretty long time to be watching it. We're not going to watch the complete partial on the other end because we start getting daylight coming up.
Yeah.
But you know, the cool part is always leading up to it, and then totality. And then I think once it starts going partial again, everybody's ready to go to bed.
Yeah.
It's the lead up to it. But you know, we'll go to Resi in just a couple minutes, but maybe just a quick thought about the difference between the lunar eclipse and the solar eclipse.
Yeah.
Because we're going to have the next great American eclipse is 2024. In fact, we're going to be setting up in Texas, in Waco, and we're working with Baylor University, City of Waco, Discovery. It's going to be a really great event down there. So what's the difference between those two, lunar eclipse and solar eclipse?
Yeah, sure. Oh, and happy birthday, Lieutenant M and Hina. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, thank you.
So the difference between a lunar and a solar eclipse is basically where the moon is and where Earth is compared to the sun. So the sun is just the light source. Just treat it like that. If the next one in line is Earth, right, then Earth's shadow is shining on the moon, and that's a lunar eclipse, right? But if it's the other way around, if it's the sun and then the moon is next and then Earth, it's a solar eclipse, right? So the moon's shadow is shining on the Earth. And from our perspective, what that looks like is someone covering the light up. And then we're basking in that umbral shadow, that shade that's being thrown by the moon. But from our perspective, it looks like the sun is being blocked by the moon. And the same would be true if you were on the moon during a lunar eclipse. It would look like Earth was covering up the moon or covering up the sun, the light source. So it's just who's throwing the shadow onto which source. But it's always the sun. Right?
So a lunar eclipse only happens at full moon?
Where they have to be in their order.
Okay, so we're gonna, in just a minute, we're gonna play our first video over here from Resi. It's about a 7-minute video about what an eclipse is. Our coverage. For those watching, send in your questions and we'll be glad to get those again. You can send them in via the YouTube chat, and then our crack team behind the scenes, Nate and Cody, Sarah and Heather, and our all-star educators will help get us to those questions.
Yeah, hopefully, any questions you have from the videos, we can do deep dives into the particular things that you like the most.
Yeah, so we want to make this as interactive as possible. And of course, I keep looking at my phone where I've got the image of the moon, and sometime in between we're going to have to actually step outside to see it, because it's just a fun thing to see. And a lunar eclipse is great because you don't need anything special. I mean, you have to be able to look up and see. You need clear skies, but otherwise you just look up. You don't need special technology or anything. So a lot of great stuff. We touched on a little bit what an eclipse is. So let's now hear from Resi Balco in this 7-minute video.
Hello, I'm Resi, Public Program Supervisor here at Lowell Observatory, and I am here to answer the question, what is a lunar eclipse? So we have our lunar eclipse happening tonight. We're moving closer and closer to it. As the moon rises, it's going to be moving into the Earth's umbra, the darkest part of the Earth's shadow. All right, so let's go ahead and jump on in. What is a lunar eclipse? Well, to talk about lunar eclipses, it helps to understand the phases of the moon. So down here, I have a sun, I have an Earth, that's us. I've got a moon right here. And so basically, let's start with talking about moon phases. When I was a kid, I thought that the moon phases were caused by the Earth's shadow. Here would be like a round shadow. I thought, okay, you've got a crescent moon, here's the Earth's shadow, bam, beautiful crescent. But that doesn't actually make sense, right? Because we also get a half moon, and to get a half moon, you have to have this like straight line running through the moon? Well, the Earth is round, so we don't have any straight lines, right? Our shadow would be a circle. And so moon phases, right, they're not caused by the Earth's shadow, they're caused by the moon's shadow. We have our sun right here, it's shining light this way, so I'll draw a little arrow, and that's the one that's going to light up part of the moon, and then the moon's own shadow, right, there's no sun casting light down here, so the moon's own shadow is what causes that dark part of the moon. So let's go ahead and introduce Earth here. So for example, right here, if you're on Earth, you would not see a moon, and the moon would be up in the daytime. That's a new moon. As we come to over here, you would only be able to see a little teensy sliver of the moon. From right here, if you're on Earth, you would see half of the moon. From over here, you would see a full moon, and it keeps going with half a moon, another crescent, and then new moon. So those are how the moon phases work. They're caused by the moon's shadow, not the Earth's shadow, as the sun is shining on only half of the moon. If that's the case though, then when we're at this point right here, this full moon, you would think, well then wouldn't Earth cast a shadow? It's between the sun and the moon. But we're working right now with like a piece of paper, right? This is two-dimensional space. We live in three-dimensional space. That means that we don't just go like side to side or side to side, we can also go up and down. And this is what happens, right? The moon is orbiting around the Earth, it's making a little circle, but he's not orbiting on a perfect flat plane. If the Earth is up here a little bit, our moon is sometimes further up, sometimes it's further down, and it kind of circles more like this. So that means for our average full moon, the Earth is actually maybe up here a little bit. And so the sun is still gonna shine directly on the moon, light up the whole thing for us, we still see a full moon. Or maybe Earth's down here and the moon's a little bit up here. But when we get a lunar eclipse, they are on the same plane. They are on this exact same level, and that means that our sunlight now does pass through the Earth's shadow does get cast on the moon. So this is then where we get a lunar eclipse as our shadow moves over that moon. Now, this is a dark circle, right? And you'll notice when we're looking at our lunar eclipse tonight that the moon doesn't just look dark, it actually looks red. So let's talk about where we get that red coloration. So our sun is shining light on Earth, right? And it's casting a shadow out on the moon. So we've got our sunlight coming, pew, sunlight. Our light is being filtered through the side of the Earth. And what's happening along here? This would be daytime on this side, nighttime on this side. So day, because that's where the sun is. Night, because this is where just like black space is. So that means that the sunlight is coming through these bits right here where day and night meet. And what's happening on Earth where day and night meet? Well, we're having sunsets. Light scatters. Different wavelengths of light, different colors, they scatter different amounts. You can see this visual that we're going to put up here in just a second, and you can see that the blue light, which has a shorter wavelength, it scatters more than the red light. So this is what causes our sunsets, right? All of the blue light that is normally filling up our whole atmosphere is scattered around, so we get this beautiful blue sky. All of that gets scattered away, and instead we start to see red, and that's what happens at sunset. Now, because the sun's light is coming at the moon from this direction, it's hitting that sunset part, and the blue light is like going like pew in this direction. And then the other colors, you know, they're going less and less as we go through like green and then like yellow. And then what ends up happening is the red light comes through this way, and it's all that remains. So instead of getting a dark moon, as we move through Earth's umbra, the darkest part of Earth's shadow, we actually get a red moon. And what I think is neat about this is that, I think it was NASA put it this way last year for a lunar eclipse. They said that the moon is red because we're looking through all of Earth's sunsets all at once. So not only are we looking at our own shadow when we look at this lunar eclipse, we're also looking at all of the Earth's sunsets, all of the Earth's sunrises that are going on at that moment, all at once, projected onto the moon. So that's where we'll get that red coloration.
Well, thanks, Rezi, for that video, and we'll take some questions if anybody has any. We've got a couple coming in. Why is the next eclipse not until 2025?
So,
Go ahead.
no, thanks. It's just the way that, you know, you have three bodies in motion and they all have to line up right for there to be an eclipse. You know, and sometimes it'll be like, here's the sun, and the moon will be like a little bit too far down, right? And so we'll miss it. And then eventually its orbit kind of moves around, the tilt of it moves around to where it's just perfectly in line for an eclipse.
And I think on average, it's something like every year and a half, on average, is a total lunar eclipse. And then there are partial ones. So the next total one will be 2025. We'll have some partial ones before then.
Yeah.
And of course, solar eclipses also, which aren't as common. And here's a question coming in: why are lunar eclipses more common than solar eclipses?
Oh, just because the moon orbits the Earth.
And there's an interesting thing with the size also. We live in a great time for solar eclipses.
Yeah.
Because the apparent size of the sun, as seen from Earth, is the same as the apparent size of the moon. They look exactly the same, even though the sun is so much bigger. It's also further away, and we just happen to live during a time when they're the same size, so the sun can be completely covered. But what happens down the road is because the moon is moving away from us. What is it, 4 inches or 4 centimeters, something like that a year? Like that. Yeah, small amount a year.
Oh, Sarah wants me to correct. The reason that there are more lunar eclipses than solar eclipses is because we're looking at the thing that has the shadow on it for the lunar eclipse. So you can see it from anywhere, right? And so it's more common to have one in your area, I guess. But a solar eclipse, you have to have the shadow being cast go right over you to see it. If you were on the moon, it would be the opposite would be true, right? And they'd be so in theory they're just as common, but for any given place to be able to see it, it is much more common to see the lunar eclipse. So that's your correction. Thank you.
And that gets into something interesting. Some research that we do here at the observatory for years is occultation research. When we're studying shadows, when something like the moon or passes in front of a distant star, or maybe Pluto passes in front of a distant star, when it passes in front, that starlight is blinked out. And by timing how long it's blinked out, for instance, you can measure the diameter of the body, and that's how Pluto's atmosphere was discovered and the rings of Uranus were discovered. So studying those shadows and understanding how bodies move in space is really important. Dr. Larry Wasserman, one of our astronomers here, has spent his entire career predicting when these things are going to happen. And Larry is so great because he's been your staff member now, and he is such a computer nerd in terms of doing all these predictions, running programs and stuff. But he also is out in the field. He's been all over the world chasing shadows.
Yeah.
And it's remarkable, and he still does this.
I went on one of those. It was fun.
It's a blast.
It was really cool. You basically hang out and go camping with a really cool telescope and time exactly when you see the shadow. And you're like, well, I did my part, and it's really like tiny. It's nothing. It's like a bleep bleep there, it's recorded. But then everyone gets their data all together, and then it's basically the pixels of an image, and then you could see the body moving in front and get a really good idea of the shape of it and all that kind of stuff. It was really cool. It was like, well, I've got my little timer thing, and they put it all together. It was really fun.
And you spend more time on the preparation and the after than the
So
actual
much more.
And yeah, if everything isn't perfect,
Mm-hmm.
You spend a lot of time and potential money
Mm-hmm.
getting nothing. But it's really some great research going on there. So we've got a couple of questions coming in. One from Tiger Gilbert, Sunset Crater, and how it's similar to the moon.
So it's not super similar, but there's a weird history for it. So so Sunset Crater is a volcanic feature. So volcano goes boom, collapses a little bit. I think it's a collapsed area. Mostly Sunset Crater is. And for a long time, people thought that the craters on the moon were volcanic features. There were what's called calderas, which is the sort of like leftover, the collapsed, structure. Like, so what's the thing that you cook that collapses? If you jiggle, yeah. So they thought it was basically like souffle that collapsed, right? And a lot of it has to do with, they see these resurgent peaks. You might be able to see one in the view now, which is like a little mountain in the middle. And they said, well, that usually forms when a crater collapses, but there's still heat underneath. It kind of like still bubbles it up and it tries to rise again. The big ones you can see it on are like Tycho and Copernicus craters on the moon, but you can see it on top of them. But people thought for a long, long time that, okay, these are very circular craters. They've got this resurgent peak. If they were from impacts, they assumed they would have like these slashes from them coming in at different angles. They'd be, what do you call them, like oval shaped. But we now know that the lunar ones are pretty much all impact craters. We don't see any volcanic type ones like that on the moon. And the resurgent peak is just because whatever hit it so hard, it rippled the ground and kind of propped it up at the end. And the reason that they're circular is because we found out that when an impact hits, it's not that it's going bloop and making a little shape. It's penetrating the surface and then detonating, blowing this giant, perfectly spherical sort of detonation, which causes.
And that Tiger brings up a great point about Sunset Crater, because geologists in the 60s were saying the same thing. And in fact, one geologist named Gene Shoemaker, among others, as NASA had declared that we're going to go to the moon, it was the moon race part of the bigger, the space race was part of the bigger Cold War. And so the NASA said we're going to go to the moon, and scientists like Gene Shoemaker said, wait a minute, if we're going to spend all this time and money to go there, and all we're doing is planting the flag and thumbing our nose at the Russians, what a wasted opportunity. We should do science. And if we're going to do science, we need to train these guys. Mm-hmm. And so Gene Shoemaker, again, was one of the pushers on this. He brought the U.S. Geological Survey astrogeology branch here in the early 60s. And in fact, in 1963, the next 9 group of astronauts that included Neil Armstrong and Jim Lovell and others, they came to do a test to see if it would be worth do geology training. And they went to Meteor Crater as an excellent analog to a lunar crater. They went to Sunset Crater for similar reasons, as well as to look at the volcano. outside and look at it ourselves because we're seeing it on the screen, but we're kind of nerdy and we want to see the real thing. So we'll take a couple more questions before we get to that. Let's see, somebody's asking if we can see the eclipse in India.
No, sorry, it's daytime there.
Yeah, it's just the location thing. Let's see. And yeah, later on we can pull up a map that shows where the eclipse is visible. And luckily here where we are in northern Arizona in Flagstaff, it's a great location. We had the last total lunar eclipse was in May, and it was about as well timed as possible because it was an early evening. The kids could stay up and see part of it.
Little champagne jam.
Yeah,
it was fun.
But now it's great for late nighters. My daughter might be out working right now, hopefully taking a look at it. But otherwise, you have to be a little committed, or should be committed, if you're going to stay this long to do this. So we'll take a look in just a couple minutes. And somebody commented about Low Observatory and Pluto. We're talking about the moon, but we have such a really unique heritage here at Low Observatory. Low was established in 1894, which is 18 years before our state, Arizona, was even established. It was Arizona Territory. And the observatory was founded by a guy named Percival Lowell, who was interested in proving the existence of intelligent life on Mars. Well, through the years, so much important research was done here. The first evidence of the expanding universe was detected on the telescope that's about, 75 yards from where we're sitting right now. That's the telescope that Percival Lowell used, and also one that visitors can look through at night, our 24-inch refractor. In 1930, Clyde Tombaugh famously discovered Pluto. He was 24 years old, and he discovered Pluto, culminating a search for a ninth planet that had started 25 years earlier. So there's so much heritage here, but what's so neat is those aren't just historic footnotes. That's the foundation for what's still happening today, our research going on. And we're going to talk more about that later on. I think now we're going to take a little break and just enjoy some views of the moon. We'll be back in about 10 minutes and play another video about supermoons and orbits with Dylan Chapman. So we'll see you in a few minutes.
Enjoy that Bella Luna.
So what keeps us here on the Earth and the moon orbiting around it is gravity. The mass of the Earth warps space-time, kind of like a heavy bowling ball on a trampoline. And so this causes what we perceive as the force of gravity, drawing things towards it and allowing for orbits around it. The moon takes about 27.3 days to go around the Earth once, and this is known as the moon's sidereal period. It takes a little bit longer to go from full moon to full. And so that comes in at just under a month at 29.5 days. The moon, as with most things in the universe, doesn't orbit in a perfect circle. Rather, it orbits in an ellipse. And so this means at one point in the moon's orbit, it's a little bit closer to the Earth, and at one point it's a little bit further away. At its furthest, the moon is about 253,000 miles from the Earth. This is known as apogee. And at its closest, the moon is about 226,000 miles away from the Earth. And that is known as perigee. So to put this into perspective, the moon on average is about 3 billion cans of beans from the Earth, but its distance varies by about 400 million cans of beans. And this animation shows that change in distance. It's also worth mentioning that all this is happening at a slight tilt. Sometimes the moon will be a little bit above or below how the Earth orbits around the sun. That's actually why we don't have eclipses more often. So let's get this back to supermoons. Now, what causes a supermoon is when the full moon matches up with when the moon is at perigee, when it's at its near point. Because it's a little bit closer, it can appear slightly larger in the sky and also the difference between a supermoon and any other full moon isn't always all that obvious. So let's say we wanted to see the moon as large and as bright as we possibly could. Well, there's a couple things that you could do. For one thing, the way that we see the moon in the sky actually changes depending on where you are on the Earth. Now, here's a picture of a supermoon when it's near the horizon and also when it's high up in the sky. And because of the Earth's rotation, bringing the second image a few thousand miles closer to the moon, it actually appears slightly larger. Another thing you could do is be near the equator, and the Earth isn't actually a perfect sphere. It actually bulges out near the equator, which would bring you slightly closer to the moon, further from the center of the Earth. All right, so now you know what a supermoon is, how to get the most out of one, and a little bit more about the moon's orbit. And I just want to say thank you to our members and donors for making all this possible.
Well, we're back. Hope you enjoyed the view and the video. And if you have any questions, again, please send those in. Again, I'm John Compton. We're educator and expert on the moon. I'm Kevin Schindler, the historian at Lowell Observatory. And we're just delighted to have you with us here. I got a message from Haley Johnson, who's watching from up at the Grand Canyon. So thanks for tuning in and also taking a look. And Rich Bonner down in Cottonwood. Also, both setting up his own telescope, taking pictures, and also tuning us in. So thanks for joining us, and thanks to all our donors and supporters who make this sort of thing possible. Lowell Observatory, we're a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to communicate science. We do that through research, through our outreach programs, and it's a partnership. It's a partnership with donors, with community, a Flagstaff community, with the science community, with the informal science. We have a lot of different partners, and it's really a thrill to be able to work with so many different groups. So thank you for your support, and thanks everybody for joining us. And also, if you're watching, sometime during the broadcast, take a minute and send in a comment. Let us know where you're watching from, because we know we have several thousand people tuning in right now, but it'd be interesting to see where you're watching from. So we're gonna chat a little bit. We're getting kind of excited here because Totality is only 11 minutes away. So we're gonna chat for a little bit, and then we'll take a little break as Totality starts. So let's until then, let's take some questions. Here's one. What's in the media? You've probably seen that this is called the Beaver Moon, or the Beaver Red Moon, Blood Red Moon, different nicknames. So let's talk about what that nickname, the Beaver Moon, means.
So I don't know about the Beaver Moon itself. Full moon has a different name because it was used as an early calendar system, right? And a lot of times they are associated with, the names are associated with things common for that month, I guess. There's, it's not coincidence that there's roughly 12 full moons, roughly, and that many months, right? It was used as an early calendar system, just like the zodiac was used as an early calendar system. Either people that were lunar centric or stellar centric when they were kind of figuring out these things. I feel like the full moon is easier to track for me because you don't have to be up at night. You can see like, hey, it's going through its phases. It's new moon. It's waxing and waning, and then you can sort of guess, hey, that's when the full moon will be. You know why specifically Beaver though? Yeah,
well, the like you were saying, that each one has a specific one, and it kind of has to do with something that's happening that month. Like the harvest moon in October is harvest time. The Beaver Moon, there's a couple different ideas of what that comes from. One is that it's when the trappers would set the traps for the beavers, or also when the beavers are most active before winter sets in. So it has something to do with activities of beaver. So it's just a general nickname. It's not scientific. It's part of the culture, and how people have looked at the sky to tell time and associate with seasons and things like that. So like a lot of things that, the moon has so much cultural history and those names really refer to that. Here's another question. Is the moon bigger than Earth?
No, it's like a quarter the size. It's like that apple compared to your face. That's but a lot farther away. People think that the moon is like, it's like, oh, here's the Earth and then here's the moon. No, they're really far apart. If they were to scale of like your head and your fist or an apple, it'd be like across the room. Like
that's about the diameter of the United States, contiguous to the United States, roughly. And Pluto, by the way, is about half that size, roughly. And so, we think about, Pluto being discovered here, and for years, Pluto was a dot. That was about it. The best telescopes, all we could see was a dot, because relative to the other planets, it's smaller, a lot smaller, and also it's further away than the other, so it's just a dot. In the 1990s, a Lowell scientist named Mark Bowie was one of the lead authors on creating the first maps of Pluto. There were just kind of dark and light areas, the albedo changes. But not till New Horizons went by in 2015 did we see Pluto as a planet in terms of how it looked with the heart shape and everything.
We missed one question that I had set up a callback for. Someone wanted to know if the moon will be blue. No, a blue moon is just what you call when you have 2 full moons in the month, because it's not exactly 12 full moons. And I believe the blue in it just comes from like the same reason, like a blue ribbon moon, like that kind of thing. Like that's that special bonus moon that you get. I just thought it was fun. So I was like roughly 12, and then we skipped it. I was like, no, people are gonna think I'm a jerk.
So here's another question: is it true Saturn will be seen up close also? And not like the moon.
Are we at opposition? No.
Well, we're when Saturn is roughly closest, opposition was a month or 2 ago when it was closest. But Saturn on average is 880 million miles away. Jupiter's half that. The moon is 250,000 miles away, 240,000 miles away. So the moon is always going to appear the biggest of anything in the sky of the bodies.
Yeah.
Mars gets closer and further away, but Mars will never, contrary to the August, 2000, news report that came out every August that Mars was going to appear as big as the full moon. That just isn't going to happen. It'll be closer than on average. Sometimes it's still going to look like a dot in the sky.
Yeah.
So Saturn will be closer, and it might sometimes it'll appear a little brighter, but it's still going to be just a point of light.
I do know that when the moon hits its stable, when it stabilizes, like we know that it's moving away from us, but that will slow down and eventually reach an equilibrium, and at that point the moon will be a tiny little dot in the sky. It will not be very big, so enjoy it while we got it, folks.
Yes, right. So here's a question from Cecil: how does the moon affect the human body?
I think it mostly affects it with like circadian rhythms and things like that, like and the light. I know that the tides, I mean, our bodies are mostly water. We're basically just bags of water and bones and stuff. I know the gravity effect you can, like, it's noticeable. You do get these big tidal bulges, but a lot of that is from the lack of the moon as well, like the lack of gravity from on the far side of the Earth from the moon. So I don't know if it would have too much effect on the. No, I mean, gravity is everywhere. Gravity affects everything. It's constant field, right? So it has some effect, guaranteed. But is it noticeable? Not to me, not day to day.
Here's another one. Here's a good question from Little Cloudy. If someone were on the surface of the moon during a total lunar eclipse, in the spot where the eclipse is visible to us from Earth, which is pretty much the whole face of the moon as we see it, would the red shadow also be visible to the person on the moon?
Probably not, because it would look exactly like a solar eclipse, but it would cover a lot more. And so I think the effect of staring at the sun would block out any of the red.
And you talk about red, we're only 4 minutes from totality, 3 minutes from totality beginning. And when we get there, we'll probably take a little break so we can run out and we'll take a break at 3:20. We'll talk about it a little bit when it goes in there. So we'll take a few more questions here. Why is the eclipse not happening again for 3 years? And we'll talk about these as our viewers change. We'll answer these questions, sometimes the same question throughout the night, but it's good to revisit that. Why we had one earlier this year in May, but we don't have another one, total lunar eclipse, until 2025.
Yeah, you have to be in a very nice perfect line with the Earth, Moon, and Sun to make it work, or the other way around as well. They have to be lined up perfectly, and their orbits aren't always perfectly lined up. And when they come back around and they have to be in the right spot, then we get them.
So we've got a lot of great questions coming in. We'll get to as many as we can right now. Why is the moon so bright?
It's being blasted by sunlight. It's actually pretty dark. It's the color of asphalt. But the moon is shining extremely, or the sun is shining extremely brightly on the surface.
And here's another question about size. Is Pluto the same size as Mercury?
No.
And no, we'll go on. No. We're just mentioning how Pluto is the smallest of the traditional 9 planets, and it's about half the diameter of the United States. To give it, yeah, so it's a fair bit smaller. Here's a question: what's the supermoon?
Supermoon is when the moon is also it's basically as close to Earth as it's going to be in its orbit, so it looks bigger by a measurable amount.
And here's a question about Saturn's rings. Are they made of moons?
It's made of ice, and they're going away as well, so they're transient. The fact that I think is cool is they are newer than the Appalachian Mountains, and they will be gone before the Appalachian Mountains are gone.
And it's interesting with the rings of Saturn, because they're these ice balls and they're mixed in. There's at some point, what do you call a moon and what's just a chunk of ice?
Yeah.
And it's how do you define it? But if you were to look at Saturn's rings, they extend from one end of the ring. If you extend to the other on the other side of the rings, like if this was Saturn's rings, Saturn's in the middle, from one to the other, that's about 3/4 of the distance to the moon. And yet the width of the rings is only half mile.
Yeah.
So very thin layer. Let's see. Couple more questions here.
Lost Planet Numuru. Check out the podcast Star Stuff, where we talk about interesting theories.
Here's a good question. That's a good for us to remind ourselves about. Can we watch the lunar eclipse with the naked eye? And that's a great question because we think about solar eclipses, lunar eclipses. Is the moon going to be too bright or not? Whatever. You can look at the moon anytime with the unaided eye, with the naked eye. It might be kind of bright. It might be a little bit bright to look at, like looking in the headlights of a car when it's really bright, but it's okay. The sun, on the other hand, you should never look at the sun. If it's a solar eclipse, the only time you can look is when it's completely, totally eclipsed. But if it's partially eclipsed, you don't look at it because you're going to damage your eyes. So it's okay. It's okay to look at a lunar eclipse. You're not going to do any damage or anything like that.
I think we're breaching into totality now.
Yes, we should be at totality right now. And so for the next hour plus, go take a look at the moon, because it's going to appear. It should appear. We haven't seen it yet, but it should appear nice and kind of a reddish color. And so we'll take a few more questions as we're getting views of that. And then at 3:20, we'll just take a break and just let everybody just go and enjoy. So we're just kind of scrolling through more questions here. As the moon gets farther away, won't it eventually leave our orbit?
No, and I kind of talked about it a little bit earlier. It will reach a stable point where it's it'll actually be fully tidally locked. There will be no wiggle anymore, and it'll be pretty far away, and it'll be pretty far in time from now. So
yeah.
You got some time to enjoy it.
And thanks to Sarah Bircher and our entire outreach team, education team, for getting us the telescope views. Sarah was just commenting how when we've been leading up in partial eclipse, sometimes it's hard to get a good view because the camera is going between the brightness of the moon and the darkness, and so the exposure can get kind of funky. But once the moon's in eclipse, it's just this consistent reddish hue.
Mm-hmm.
It's not real bright in one area, real dark, and so except for clouds, the views should be real consistent that we can see. Why do we not have eclipses for other planets?
We do. They're called transits. You see them often enough.
Okay, what would the Earth's atmosphere have to be made of to make the shadow on the moon look blue?
Oh.
Yeah, what elements would that be?
I don't. Not a billion years. I have no idea.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Here's another question. How do we track the north and the south node of the moon's orbit? Is there an astronomical difference between the eclipses at either node?
We just look and see the point that it rotates around, right? The magnetic field of the moon is non-existent anymore. We have glass beads that have had the Earth's magnetic field embedded in them from impact. So like it would just be a look at it wiggle, look at it rotate. That's kind of the line.
Yeah, okay. And again, let's revisit again why it appears red.
Yeah, it's red because you know, the sunlight can only shine around the Earth, and basically Earth's atmosphere is refracting the light and scattering the light into the red, and it's the same reason we get sunsets. So if you really want to think about it, the only light hitting the moon during the totality is sunset light.
Mm-hmm. Here's a question from Kayla to both of us. Do you have a favorite moon phase?
What about you?
I guess probably a full moon because the romance of it,
Mm-hmm.
the cultural history of it, and the fact that we can get an eclipse.
Yeah.
So I guess probably that.
Oh.
Although I also like first quarter for viewing.
Yeah.
Third quarter is great also,
Mhm.
but first quarter, I guess I'm more familiar with that side of the moon.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'll take anything with the moon.
First quarter's mine because you get a lot more. You can, as the terminator of the moon, like the
Mhm.
sunset line crosses the moon. You get like it casts deeper shadows in the craters and all the geology stuff that I enjoy.
Oh yeah, and I like first quarter because some of my favorite, the Apollo history, where they landed,
Mhm.
and you get that during first quarter. Also, there's sometime around the first quarter when you get Purbeck's cross, which is that phenomena. It only happens during first quarter for, I don't know, a couple hours, where you get this phenomena where there's several different craters. I think it's like 4 craters, and the shadow is just right where it's crossed.
Oh, that's fun.
It's called Purbeck's cross, and you can't even see it every first quarter.
Mm.
Everything has to be just right. You know, I've had this question through the years. Also, my favorite thing to look at through the telescope. And there's so many great things, but my favorite's the moon.
Yeah.
Because
Really cool.
because geologists his background, you can see analogs, things that we're familiar with, and the details and the history of going there and going back there.
You could explore it for forever with a home telescope or even just like a binocular set. There's
Mhm.
so many cool features in the moon, and every day brings new features to light as you view because of that terminator line crossing.
Yeah. And I think since we have so many questions, let's just keep answering those
Sure.
as they come through. And we might take a little break in a few minutes, but we want to try to get as many questions as possible. So why does the moon not look as red in Houston? Or does it?
I would say it's probably a combination. You know, we've got a little bit of enhancing of our with the telescope, right? It's going to be able to see a lot more than your naked eye can. I don't think smog has much to do with it. I think there might be some effects from like light pollution in general and just humidity.
So it's not necessarily the geographic location, it's local conditions
Yeah,
that might have something to do with it.
We've been pushing dark sky stuff since Percival Lowell basically got here, you know. So.
And I just put on my Houston Astros hat in honor of Cody, who's managing all the operations here, our marketing manager and guru. They won the World Series, which some people like, some people don't, but we just hear cheering back there. But the Astros are tied into the moon because in 1962, Houston got a new baseball team. They call them the Colt 45s, and they played at whatever stadium. But in 1965, a new stadium was going to open called the Astrodome, and it was named after the astronauts who were training in that area. And so the team decided to change the name to Astros to follow along with Astrodome. So that's how they got their name. And that's why Cody was cheering just a minute ago, because of the Astros.
The lone Aster.
Yeah. Let's see. Here's a question from Laura. Was there a meteor shower this morning or last night? There was some minor, I think the tail end of a minor shower. The next major one of the Leonids later this month, and the Geminids are in December. And there are several minor meteor showers also. And I'm not sure if we were on the tail end of one of those. We can look that up.
来，准备，主播就定位，我们准备进现场。
好，收到。怎么口气味道这么重啊？啊，忘记我刚刚吃了韭菜锅贴，等等还要面对来宾，怎么办？啊，还好我有水神漱口水，水神漱口水及时救援，有效抑制异味。哇，刚刚的异味都消失了。导播，我准备好了。水神漱口水呢，成分单纯无添加，帮助口气清新，维持口腔健康，而且有国家品质标章的认证。在你刷牙的时候、漱口的时候，都可以有效辅助清洁你牙缝间的死角。怎么买呢？中天快点购平台就可以买得到哦，而且是全通路独家贩售。记得输入我的推荐代码 CTI010，会有优惠哦。
来，准备，主播就定位，我们准备进现场。
好，收到。怎么口气味道这么重啊？啊，忘记我刚刚吃了韭菜。